the U.S. Air Force is preparing to offer some new KC-46 tankers for operational use as early as this year, although continued technical issues will keep the aircraft from combat missions. Under the new plan, announced by Air Mobility Command in February, the Air Force will commit a certain number of KC-46s to execute operational missions tasked by U.S. Transportation Command, which manages how the U.S. military transports people and equipment around the globe. The Air Force currently has 44 KC-46s of the 179 it plans to buy. By the end of 2021, that number will be up to 60 tankers. However, there are a number of missions that the KC-46 will not be permitted to perform until its critical deficiencies are resolved and the Air Force deems it fully operational. Earlier, I spoke with Defense News Air Warfare reporter Valerie Encina for this week's Actionable Intelligence. Valerie, welcome. There's some news on the tanker front. Can you tell us a little bit about where the KC-46 is in terms of operations?
Yeah, so a couple weeks ago, the Air Force decided that, even though the KC-46 has been sort of mired in some very long-standing technical issues for the past couple of years, that it was going to try to figure out a plan to put the KC-46 into limited operations. So the problem that it's been having, years long now at this point, it revolves around the remote vision system. And that is a system of cameras and sensors that KC-46 boom operators are going to use when they steer the boom into a receiver aircraft and start pumping gas. So the KC-46 kind of works a little bit differently than legacy tankers do. In those KC-10s, KC-135s, you have the operators, they're sitting in the back, they're looking out a window, and they can actually see, visibly, what is happening, how close am I, how close is the boom to this aircraft, what's happening, and they can rely on their eye. And KC-46 boom operators, they're seated up towards the front, and they're completely reliant on this system of cameras and sensors. And right now, there are some deficiencies associated with that, where the imagery just isn't up to snuff, and in certain lighting conditions, it's very difficult to refuel.
So the limited capacity that the KC-46 is at is it can refuel planes in training and not stealth planes, and also not another type of plane.
So it cannot refuel the A-10 at this point. And that's because of a problem with the KC-46 boom. When the Air Force was, approving the requirements for the KC-46, they told Boeing, look, this boom, it meets our requirements, go ahead and build it this way. But in actuality, the A-10 doesn't produce enough thrust so that it can actually refuel from a KC-46 with its boom being as stiff as it is. So now Boeing is sort of kind of having to go back to the drawing board, redesign that boom so that the A-10 can finally refuel from it.
And stealth as well, right?
Yes, and stealth planes as well. That's a different problem. That's due to the problems with the remote vision system. There are concerns that, if F-35 or B-2 or another stealth plane were to get fuel from the KC-46, if the lighting conditions are poor and a boom operator doesn't see exactly where they're steering the boom, that could collide with the aircraft and skim off the surface of the low observable coating, the stealth coating that keeps those planes from being detected by radar. So that's something that they want to avoid using that tanker for right now.
Are we going to see the KC-46 on real-life deployments anytime soon?
No, not anytime soon. The commander of Air Mobility Command, General Van Ovost, made it very clear that the KC-46 is going to be staying out of the Middle East, and it's also going to be staying out of the Indo-Pacific and Europe. So all of the combatant commands that would deploy that KC-46 in an operational context. That's not something that's going to happen right now. The missions that the KC-46 is going to be allowed to take on are going to be more stateside missions. It might help to escort fighters. It might help refuel aircraft during exercises or training missions. But for right now, they want to make sure that for operations, for an actual combat environment, they want to make sure that operators have a proven tanker that they can rely on.
We'll see where this one goes. Valerie, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And now for industry headlines. The Air Force announced it received its first F-15EX on March 10th in Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, and will soon begin testing the Boeing aircraft. The newest EX version of the F-15 comes with advanced avionics, such as Eagle Passive Active Warning and Survivability Electronic Warfare System, a digital cockpit, the more advanced ADCP-2 mission computer from Honeywell, and fly-by-wire flight controls. The Air Force placed its first order for the F-15EX in July 2020, awarding a contract for the first lot of 8 jets with a value not to exceed about $1.2 billion. The entire program has a ceiling value of $23 billion. The service plans to buy at least 144 F-15EXs to replace the F-15C and D fleet, which is at an average age of 37 years and is starting to see structural strain. However, the contract has options that would allow the Air Force to buy up to 200 jets. And that's it in industry news this week. When we come back, personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives service members tips on staying ahead of COVID-19 scams. And later, a conversation on how the Army could counter swarms of drones.